All right, guys, welcome back to Crossman Productions Presents. I'm excited about today. I got to interview Buddy last week, and one of the really cool things about doing this show is, I tell you guys this all the time, is the people I get to meet from doing this show, and a lot of the people that I meet are introductions from some of the other people that I've already had a chance to interview. So I we've interviewed him a couple times, but the last interview, we really got to sit down with him before it was him with the group from Arkansas. But we love Buddy over here too. So Buddy told me about a friend of his who has a really powerful and um, and so he told me that some of the things that they're kind of working on, and said that I should have her on the show. So she sent some information about her story, and um, you know it's another one of those just one of those stories that really, as a father, really gets to you. It kind of brings it back to Elizabeth Gerald's story. So I definitely wanted to bring her on and talk about her journey, and get to know her. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce author Cae Cordell, and she's actually here with Buddy. So good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for having me on your show, Parks. I appreciate it very much.
I'm excited about having you on and having you share your story. Like I said, the one of the things I really like about this show is the people I get to meet, and then the stories that and the journeys that people share, and just so many amazing people and so many incredible stories. So I wanted to bring you on to share yours because um, your story is just it's a heartbreaking as a father, to hear stories like that. So I wanted you to come in and kind of share your journey. So go ahead. You was you gonna say something?
Yes,
Uh,
I'd like to talk about something that's very unusual and has not been really investigated or stories done much on a mother who molested her children.
mm,
And my story is about matriarchal rape, and then also my father and brother and three uncles abused me from the earliest my memories are about 3 years old on. And until I left home at 18, I don't ever remember a day going by without either being beaten or sexually abused by someone in my family.
right.
And growing up, we lived 25 miles back from basically civilization,
Right.
and uh, no one visited us. My father was a very brutal man, and I grew up on a large farm doing labor since I was 4.5 years old and started raising my baby sister. And by age 12, another baby was added to the family, and I helped raise him till I was 18.
Right.
But looking back, my journey has been amazing for me for the fact that I got away. I was able to go to college and finish college and grew up knowing I had to leave the situation or die.
Mm,
Uh, my father believed that he owned his children. And in fact, he bought them from my mother in one of their fights for $350 for all of us. So I knew my value was not much, but I decided I'd find worth, and
yeah.
I've worked toward that goal all these years is finding worth in myself and giving that hope to other women and abused men. In counseling, I've served as a minister. I'm a certified chaplain, and the journey has not been easy. And often I encounter young women who are in domestic violence and sexual abuse, So I offer them the help that I've learned.
Right. So let me kind of go back. So you were born and raised in Arkansas.
Yes, I was born and raised in Kingston, Arkansas, Madison County.
And what was that demographic in like geographic area at that time?
Northwest Arkansas, near Huntsville, Fayetteville.
Right.
The Ozark Mountains, way back in the woods of the Ozark Mountains.
Okay. And so what I mean, like, can you set the stage for us of like growing up? What was that?
What was it like growing up?
Okay. Growing up was very difficult, Parks. Dad had a 430-something acre farm, and he bought a bunch of dairy cattle. So I became the milkmaid.
Wow.
And every day was milking those cows, going to the pasture at night and gathering them back up to milk again, taking care of my baby sister. My mother didn't want her. She brought her home and dumped her on the bed and said, I don't want her, called her an ugly name. And my grandfather salvaged a pop bottle and a lamb's nipple and showed me how to put it on a bottle, and I fed her cow's milk.
Wow.
And every day was a struggle for her to survive and me to salvage enough food for me to eat. Finally, I started helping in the garden and learned to cook. And by age 7, I was watching the pressure canner on the wood cook stove canning food.
Wow.
So my whole life growing up was about survival, fighting off the rape and abuse. And at 16, I became pregnant, and my father beat me till I lost the baby. Now, whether it was his or my brother's, I don't know.
Wow.
But at 12, he sold me to a man, tried to force me to marry the guy, and I refused. And so from then on, I ate my food out of the floor, which I cooked. And I learned to eat out of the skillet. And then at 8th grade, I got a job at school washing the school dishes. He refused to pay my lunch or pay for my schooling, so I went to the school cooks and asked them, could I work for my lunch? And they found out I wasn't getting to eat at home, and so they had 2 meals a day for me, 5 days a week to eat at school. And I worked my way through school and paid for my books by doing the school dishes. And then the older I got, they put me as a substitute teacher in the school for the other lower grades. And I also served as the school nurse because I had guts enough. Blood and guts and gore didn't bother me.
Right. So now, when you were going to school during that time, was there any teachers or anybody who kind of picked up on any of that kind of abuse? And did anybody even try to intervene to help?
Everyone, my dad weighed 280 pounds, 6'2", and was very violent. Everyone was afraid of him. I had one teacher, Catherine Combs, that went to him and asked him, she was childless, if she and her husband could adopt me. And he said, yeah, for $500, you can have her.
Wow.
And it shocked her so bad, she went no further, and I had a cousin that taught school, Hazel McCullough, and she would bring medicine to school and clean my wounds up. But at that time, we had a sheriff that he didn't care.
Wow.
And children really had no value in Arkansas during my growing up years. The laws were for the parents.
Right.
And people knew what was going on, the teachers, but they didn't know what to do. And my grandpa and grandma tried to help and intervene, but that got nowhere.
Wow.
About what years it was?
I graduated from high school in 65. So basically from 51 through, or 53 through 65 is the years I went to high school. And I won at graduation. I got a little scholarship to Drawings Business School in Little Rock. So I went to Little Rock, and they found me a place to live, and I got to work that year for a lady and her husband and go to business school. And that got me enough training that I could get a job in the summer, and for eventually large companies would hire me in the summer to work for them. And then I graduated 1971 from Arkansas Tech, and then in 1997 I graduated from Boise State University with several degrees.
Oh, wow.
I knew, Parks, this is one thing I want young folks to understand. Education is your key to get out of situations. I went on to become a teacher, and I taught for a medium security prison as a college instructor. And it is possible to get out of domestic violence and out of sexual abuse. And you can't turn to drugs or to drinking or hypersexuality. These are things that so many victims turn to. And one thing that helped me was I found the Lord. I accepted Jesus at age 11. And by age 16, God called me into the ministry against the wishes of my parents, which I got beaten often. But pastors started inviting me to speak to their youth groups.
Wow.
And I was used of God to see hundreds come to the Lord at a very young age. And even though I got a beating when I went home, I would walk and someone would pick me up and take me to where I was supposed to preach.
Wow.
I was just stubborn, I reckon, Parks.
So let me ask you then, going through what you're going through at home, you said you got saved at a young age. What kind of drew you into going to church?
Now, my dad, there's a difference in being a Christian and being religious.
Right.
My dad was very religious. He had the entire Bible memorized, and he had the Communist Manifesto memorized. So we grew up hearing communism spouted at breakfast. The Bible quoted before he went to church. He went to church for show. And he could preach like a maniac.
Wow.
He and mother would fight all the way to church, get out and pull our hair and say if we said anything, they'd get us after church.
Wow.
And we went to a revival at Aroa, Arkansas. A lady minister was preaching, and I fell asleep at school, this old school desk in this church. I fell asleep while the woman was preaching because I was so tired. Right. And the Holy Spirit woke me up and told me I needed to get saved. This would be my last chance to overcome what I was living.
Wow.
When I get up, my mother trying to hold me down in the seat, I crawled out over that old school desk and go up to the altar and accept Jesus as my Savior. And I've never had a regret, never looked back. And I won a Bible. We had a Missionary Alliance ladies that came in when I was in the 4th grade. And you could memorize so many scriptures and win a Bible. Right. Well, I memorized all the scriptures and I won a Bible. Wow. And I took it home and hid it, and I started reading that Bible. Grandpa and Grandma Russell were holiness ministers. And until the 4th grade, they lived on our farm. My dad was his parents, and he mistreated them terribly. But they lived for Jesus. I'd hear them out across the fields. I was driving in the milk cows to milk them, praying for me, calling my name in prayer, and encouraging me every chance they got to find Jesus. And I knew they had something I didn't. They didn't get angry. They didn't cuss. They didn't scream. And they always slipped me food when they could. And my dad beat them one day really bad. And my grandpa pulled a gun, told him, "You're going to buy me out or I'm going to kill you." And Grandpa and Grandma got away from him that way. They forced him to get a loan and buy his share of the farm out. But my grandparents were a steady, loving influence in my life. And they're the reason I become a Christian.
Wow. So, you're saying that your grandparents, that was his parents, right?
Yes, that was his parents.
So it makes you wonder how he strayed so far away and became the man he became. Um, was there anything like in his history that kind of led him that way, or?
My grandpa told me that he did not have one child that had any virtue about them.
Hmm.
In his day, before he found the Lord, he was a woman chaser.
Okay.
And so those early years really have an influence on our children.
Right.
And he had polio at a young age, and he used that as an excuse that his mind wasn't quite right. In today's world, he had been a paranoid schizophrenic.
Wow.
And my mother was found after I had a family. I took her to a hospital. She was found to be a sociopath. The doctor called me asking me to have her committed that she was a danger to any child. And that was in 2010. It was earlier than that. But anyway, when I had to cut off from her, I called my dad and told him what the doctors had found. He said, "I'll kill you if I can find you." And so I cut off from them and quit in 1979. And I never had anything else to do with my parents. They're both dead now. And I chose just to walk away from my own sanity.
Wow.
And that's the reason I've written a script on Redbird Phoenix, is trying to put my story out there. The story of matriarchal rape has not, as far as I know, not been done in a movie. But my goal is to educate people, to have open forums like this for discussion.
Right.
I'd like to see a constitutional amendment to our Constitution protecting domestic violence victims and sex abuse victims. And that's my whole goal in telling my story, is to educate, to let victims know that they can become survivors.
For me, first of all, it's amazing that, you grew up in the church, people saw this, and you kept your faith. A lot of people start blaming God whenever they start going through, a rough time, especially, with the abuse and, people seeing it and nobody doing anything. People always want to know why God allows things like that to happen. And then it causes them to stumble in their faith. So for you to keep your faith during that time is, that's incredible, especially, as young as you were at the time. So then you decided, that you wanted to start, you got away and you started writing about it. What kind of led you to start writing books about, the abuse, and how did that kind of transpire?
I was teaching in the prison, and a lot of memories were always there. And when I went to Boise State University and graduated in 1997, one of my professors, I did the counseling book. I developed a theory, and from the communications department, and my professor told me, Dr. Ben Parker, he told me, he said, if you don't tell your story and write a counseling book from your theory and looking at law enforcement, the courts, and society and how they view a rape victim, I know how I had been viewed. I was seen as trash, nasty, dirty, a liar, couldn't have happened. I could have stopped it. Those are the things, are the even worse comments that law enforcement used to make, is you wanted it, you dressed provocative, it was your fault, right. You asked for it, you participated in it. Those are the things that I want to bring into the light and show that all of that is totally misconceptions, a lot of lack of communication, and really corrupting and re-victimizing the victim again. And I decided if I told my story, it would maybe loosen the screws in my family, where abuse has been domestic violence the last 6 generations.
Wow.
And when I told my story, several cousins stepped forward. Some flew to Idaho, where I was living at the time, to visit with me. And shared their story with me, and I still have cousins in my family who are sex offenders. They in turn have offended many. It's a generational, I call it a generational sin, Parks, that just keeps visiting if we don't kill it. And that is learning to become a survivor and name the perpetrators. Tell who's abusing you, or if in the past, name that person. I use real names in my books. I hid nothing. And when we shine the light in darkness, it is illuminated, and we can see clearly what is happening or what has happened. So my prayer is that the light of God will shine in this country on all those victims. My research at Boise State University showed that out of 1,000 women, 500 of them had been sexually abused.
Wow. And
out of 1,000 men, every third man had been molested. I was shocked. I went to the local FBI office and talked with them, and they said, your facts are straight. Because I had to defend my thesis in front of the communication department. And so I was able to defend it quite clearly and well. It's a shock. I speak to churches. Anyone that will invite me, I'm willing to come. You pay my way there and back. That is acceptable. And I'm quite excellent speaker on these issues, and I'll address any issues for any pastor that he needs addressed with the congregation, sit and answer questions, visit and do counseling. I've been cleared to speak on Army bases I have here in Arkansas, speak to soldiers. I speak on post-traumatic stress, suicide, and resilience. And all these things that Army veterans go through, domestic violence and sexual abuse victims experience also.
Wow. And, as you were talking about that, I know like when you grew up in poverty and it happened. But, as we look at the news today, we see that it's happening even in Hollywood, with the elite, so it's not, just like one class of people. I mean, this problem is a huge problem.
It is a big problem. I've worked with clients in abuse cases, that doctors, lawyers, preachers. When I was teaching in the prison, a huge portion of my students in the prison were sex offenders. And that included high-priced doctors, lawyers, judges. It knows no boundaries, because society, when they removed the death penalty, and I'm going to shock a few, but when they removed the death penalty for rape, it unleashed a flurry of pedophiles, perverts, and perversion that there was a organization of fathers that was in Idaho that believed they had a right to use their children, and they raped them. I had a teacher when I was teaching in subbing for a school district. She asked me, she said, how did I send this 12-year-old girl home tonight knowing her father's going to use her all night? She said, you need to tell the sheriff's department. I said, no, ma'am, you heard the story. You need to tell. I want people to understand, if someone tells them that they're being abused, go immediately call authorities.
Right.
Let someone know and stop it. Take responsibility. Quit being driven by cowardice.
Right.
That's hard for people to understand. A child doesn't know who to tell, who to trust.
Right.
I was told that my dad told me if I told anybody, he'd kill my baby sister. And
So,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, so now do you think that there's more resources available for people to report that thing, to report sexual abuse too? And are those people taking these cases serious?
Unfortunately, I can say here in a local county, I took a little girl to a children's hospital, And she was examined, and the doctor came out and said, Miss Cordell, the little girl has definitely been raped, but because there is no scarring, Polk County Sheriff's Department will not do anything. And they didn't. They talked to the perpetrator 15 minutes and said he had repented. God had forgiven him, so they weren't going to arrest him.
Wow.
2 years later, that little girl tried to commit suicide. And she still struggles and will for the rest of her life. What we need to understand, sexual abuse victims they serve a life sentence of troubled behavior, of troubled emotions, and of trying to trust. When rape occurs, it splits the mind, body, and spirit apart. In my counseling book, When Forgiveness Isn't Enough, I've done a lot of drawings, professional drawings, showing what happens to the mind, body, and spirit once rape occurs. And this book was written directly to educate lawyers, police officers, law enforcement, and judges, and church and society. I'm very thankful. I donate my book to law firms to use in court. I don't charge for them to use the book. And because that's my way of being able to give back, Parks, and let others get help. A local prosecutor has the book, he asked for it, and I define every avenue, any kind of happening, it is explained in the counseling book. And I know, and I'm praying that it continue to be successful in helping those who've been victimized.
Do you think that, because you're talking, doctors, lawyers, the different people that's involved, do you think that's why a lot of people aren't being heard? Is because those in charge are also the ones maybe doing the crime?
Absolutely. I really believe that. Too many people, they want to explain it away. They don't want to believe a child. Often, unfortunately, there are those in law enforcement who were sexually abused themselves.
Right.
And if it's hidden, they don't have to face it. And here in Arkansas, Governor Huckabee tried to change the law. He worked hard. We do have some help in place by legislation. We've got 6 advocacy centers in Arkansas that have been opened, and we have a different people being trained. But what is hard in the states without good help is the lack of adequate counselors who can go to court and who are certified in working with the sexually abused. I worked with a lady in Idaho. Her name was Wanda Newton. She was a trained sexual abuse advocate and counselor. She worked with my children, and unfortunately, I grew up and married a sex offender and had 3 children with him. And 20 years later, my baby girl told me that her poppy was hurting her. And when I checked, I could see the evidence of rape.
Wow.
Took me 9 days to get away. He thought he knew I'd found him out. And I had went to the sheriff's department in Canyon County, Idaho, in December 90, telling them he was battering me, raping me, and trying to kill me. And I thought he was abusing my children. The prosecutor told me to go home and quit persecuting the old man.
Wow.
And I went home and lived until September 91 before I could get away from him. I went to the federal VA doctors in March 21st, 1991, and I told Larry Dewey, the psychiatrist, that I thought my husband was raping my children and that he was raping me, and I was almost dead. He laughed about me, but he made a mistake. He wrote it in these clinical notes that wife says believes husband is raping children. And when I finally got him arrested, he was charged and convicted. I was able to sue the federal VA and won the first case, as far as we knew, in the United States on rape. They covered it up. They come to court and lied. But when I knew the date I turned him in, I'd marked it down.
Right.
And when my lawyer, we got those records, there it was. And so we settled out of court. I was so ill, but we need to fight. We need to have a provision. We need to have a fund that victims can go and get an attorney free and sue the perpetrator, go to court and be represented by a guardian ad litem, and make the system work. States need to pass more laws, harsher laws for children and for domestic violence victims. The most dangerous situation for law enforcement is a domestic violence situation. So many white women will call, but when the cops get there, they will defend the man who's just beaten them half to death.
Right.
And often women go back as much as 32 times and wind up murdered. So we've got a situation that this country is not comfortable with. There's not enough medical knowledge. There's not enough court knowledge, not enough prosecutors who know this process to actually become effective.
Right. So let me ask you, for somebody who is struggling with this, with sexual abuse, advice do you give them?
Find a good counselor, someone that's educated. That's going to be very difficult to find, but find someone to talk with. I'm on Facebook. I'll give free advice as best I can to help. Get involved. Find a victims group that you can attend. Find a trusted pastor. Unfortunately, I went to a pastor when I got away from home in Little Rock,
Right.
and he tried to rape me. So I wound up believing all these attacks were my fault. Somehow I'd done something wrong.
Right.
And this is how victims feel. They blame themselves. There's justification in getting mad.
Right.
And I write about that in the counseling book. Order my counseling book. Read it and believe in yourself. If you've been victimized, it's real. You're not imagining it. It wasn't your fault. And you deserve a better life. If you're still under 23 years old, bring a lawsuit against your perpetrator. Don't be afraid to find a lawyer that'll fight for you.
Right.
He's going to get part of the money. Money's not going to satisfy that brokenness, but it will stop and bring the perpetrator out into the public view, and that's what I encourage.
And the second part of that, my question would be, is what can we do as, society to be able to go after, the perpetrators?
Form citizens groups, become court watchers, work with the prosecutor's office, ask them when you can come to court, become an advocate in your church. Always do background checks on any person participating in the church. Make sure they're safe. Perpetrators go to church. They go and put on a big front. Boy Scout leaders, you've got to look at your teachers, coaches. Take a jaundiced eye look at anyone around your children, uncles, cousins. Look at them. How are they acting? Are they getting your children off and grooming them to accept abuse? Are you letting your children go around your grandpa, your uncle, your dad who molested you? If you are, shame on you. You can change that. Name them. Call them what they are. And get away from them. There's DHS, Department of Health, Welfare. They have advocates that will work with children. Get on food stamps. Get on go to the housing authority. Get away. Find a way that you can get help. Call the cops. Ask them for an advocacy center. Many cops now are being trained to watch for victimization. Talk to your teacher. If you're being hurt, go to your teacher. Go to the principal. If someone in school is hurting you, hunt down the school resource officer and tell them.
So
Put it on Facebook. Write someone on Facebook. Say, I need help.
Wow. And that's the other thing. We have social media now that that you didn't have back then, where you could reach outside of your neighborhood. Just your local. Just the people that you see every day. Now we have such a big influence. With the social media that helps too.
But
You
that's why,
talked about. Oh, go ahead.
that is why I'm speaking out, Parks. If they see my face, them. When I got away from home, my teachers encouraged me, Mrs. McCullough, Mrs. Combs. They told me I could make it, that they knew I could make it because I knew how to work and always kept, some kind of a job. I washed dishes, I ironed, anything to make a nickel, I learned to do it. And there's so many ways today. Don't believe when someone tells you you're nothing, you're a coward. Don't believe it. You're the bravest person in the planet. If you're being abused and go and tell it, and you survive, your bravery deserves the Medal of Honor.
Right. The other thing you mentioned too is having stricter laws to punish those that are committing, sexual abuse and just domestic violence in general. Again, how could the average citizen get involved in getting laws like that passed?
Talk to your state legislatures, talk to your congressman, write your governor's office, write the attorney general's office, ask what you can help, where you can serve, go to your county judge, your local law enforcement, your prosecutor's office, and talk to them. Get to know who the judges are. Go sit in court on abuse cases. Listen to what is happening. And then write your newspaper, write articles on Facebook, social media, expose these people. Tell what you've observed. Get other people to join you. Go to church, start a church group. Let victims. If you go to church and you looked at all the women in that church, half of them stand as a percentage of having been abused in some form or fashion. Now we have date rape, we have sex trafficking. All these things are in our community, close to our home. Someone is watching a child or grooming that child as we speak and are sexually abusing them right now.
Wow.
These are things that we've got to open our eyes and not bury our head in the sand like an ostrich.
Right.
Unfortunately, we don't live in Kansas anymore.
Right.
And
so, one of the things that I admire about you is that you're out there telling your story, and making people aware of, and bringing this to light, and you've written a couple of books on this. So I want to kind of talk about the books that you've written, two in particular.
Okay, Redbird Phoenix is the first book in my life story. It is from age birth to 18. And in that story, I explain and tell how I grew up, the things daily that I lived through, and how I got away from home at 18. And in The Hat Man is the story of my marriage from 24 to now. And I very frank about what I lived through, what happened to my children and I, because in telling the story, I took the shame out of my life, right, by exposing to the public. And when several of my cousins came forward thanking me for telling my story so that they could talk about it, I was enlightened. I thought it was just me and my family, but it was a lot of us in our family. Out of 43 grandchildren and then a host of great-grandchildren, a lot of us have been sexually abused. Wow. And there's no shame in that. The shame rests with every man or woman who molested us. A victim bears no shame. And by telling my story in The Hat Man, Governor Andrus, Cecil Andrus was the governor. He personally got involved in my case. He believes that the prosecutor, I had a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law who were multimillionaires, and he believes that they bought Richard Harris off, the prosecutor, paid him off to get a lighter sentence for my husband in Idaho. And he was convicted in Canyon County, Idaho. The case is sealed because it was about my children, but I have the entire case. And Congressman Richard Stallings got involved, and the federal VA got involved, and they awarded me most of my husband's. I got him his total disability, and they awarded that to me and the children till they each one got 18. So if you get involved and speak out, there is a plethora of avenues out there that if we as the public get informed, we know who to send the victims to.
Right.
I'm asking you to be an informed public, to become in the streets. The Me Too movement was a wonderful movement, and I'm hoping someone in that movement will see my story and help make it into a movie. We need to speak out. We need to tell our stories. It's a viable option, and the more we tell it, ignorance is blind. It causes blindness. What I'm trying to do is to sideline ignorance part.
Right. You know, and you bring up a good point too, you know, because a lot of people suffer from this in silence because they're ashamed. You know, if more people, you know, stand up against it and expose it publicly, and you know, I think that it'll cause a movement of people that are experiencing it to come out, and the more people who come out and share their stories will force, you know, the people who are doing it to be exposed.
Yes.
You know, and so it's important for, you know, anybody that's watching this to, you know, who's suffering from that. It's important for you to be able to share your story, and know that you're not alone. You know, there is, you know, other people out there, and your story, and that's, you know, again, like one of the reasons I do this, because your story, you know, inspires and encourages other people. And I really believe that people go through different things, not only for you to learn and grow, but so that you can share your story with other people so that helps them learn and grow. So, you know, having people like you come in and share your story, inspire other people, you know, and encourage them. I mean, that's, you know, I give, you know, I tip my hat to you because, you know, it takes a lot of, you know, courage to come forward and be able to, you know, to share that with people. But it also helps people, you know. The whole ideal is to bring this to light. Let's go after the people that's committing, you know, these horrible crimes and get them off the streets. You know, let's get them out of society. You can't behave in society. You don't belong in society, you know. And then also it encourages people who aren't going through it to recognize the signs, and then get involved to help those who are going through it.
If the public could see the terror in the eyes of the victims that I have worked with,
Right.
If they could understand the horror, it would liberate the public to step forward and say no more.
Right.
And I'd like to see a movement. Basically, I'm encouraging name the perpetrator.
Right.
You know, get these men out there in public, these women, get them out there so that I think there ought to be a registry of all victims stepping forward and naming the perpetrator, and those perpetrators kept in a file in police offices. Often lawyers will get these men off. They make plea deals. There should be no plea deals for sex offenders.
Right.
I'm absolutely against that. It accomplishes nothing. They're let go on good behavior, right back out on the street, hurting. One man average can hurt potentially 700 victims till they're 70 years old. And out of that 700 victims, it opens the door for them to be hurt, and it multiplies. When it floods a family like it has mine, it is, as I said, back 6 generations. It is a horror that never stops giving.
Right.
You marry into domestic violence. You marry what you know. I had one therapist tell me that she thought we sex abuse victims created a pheromone that attracted perpetrators. And I think it's in our demeanor. I know I couldn't look anyone in the face. I looked down at the ground all the time. I walked around as if I was no one. And the more education I got, the more value I saw in myself. When I first started writing my books, Sparks, I just knew my dad and mother were outside the window watching me write and were going to get me. And it was the terror of telling and exposing this. It took me quite a while to get where I could speak like this. Now, I just didn't instantly open my mouth and become the person I am today. It took a lot of years in counseling and getting the degrees that I got so that I could in turn work with people.
Right.
It was a long learning process, but it's a lifelong process, but you can find joy. You can make a good marriage. You can have good relationships. You can raise wonderful children, and you can have a wonderful life. But speaking up is the first step of freedom.
Right.
Tell me about the Redbird.
And in Redbird Phoenix, I called it the Redbird Phoenix, the book and the movie script, for the fact that when I was a little girl, when I was being beaten, God would send a redbird to sit by me or lie on my shoulder. I think probably I was the only one that saw the redbird,
Right.
but would sit on the windowsill or it would flutter around my dad's head and encourage me and chirp. And I realize now it was the Holy Spirit God was sending to let me know that he was with me. And that little bird was key to my survival.
Wow.
And at the end of The Hat Man, I tell how the red bird comes and what happens at that point. I'm not going to give it away.
Right.
But God blessed me tremendously
Right.
with his covering in my salvation. And I'm a Pentecostal minister, belong to the Methodist Church. But at 16, I experienced the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, which gave me such internal power and a God connection. It took me till I divorced my husband to really loose what I'd learned in God.
Wow.
And the more I spoke out, the more my voice become heard and the less fear I had. I speak now, sometimes I get stage fright. You'll never see my knees knocked together, but Buddy props me up every once in a while. And he's a blessing. He takes me to, places that I need to be and helps me. And it's that kind of encouragement that we find in friends
Right.
that spurs us on. And, just a word, he'll say, now you can do this and you can make it. Those are words of a friend that is a lifesaver.
Right.
And I encourage every victim, find a friend that you can confide in and stand with you. If you're married and in domestic violence, find someone that can go with you and be a friend when you report what is happening. And do it for your children. Get away from domestic violence. Your children, break the cycle.
Right.
If you're letting yourself stay in a domestic violence situation, 20 years from that time, you're going to see your children either marry into domestic violence or become perpetrators themselves.
Wow. You were talking about, how, for the longest time, it was hard for you to talk about, the things that happened to you. Do you remember the moment where you're like, I've had enough and I just want to get this out and get this story? Do you remember that?
Yes, it was June the 10th, 1979, when my mother laughed on the phone after the doctor had called me and told me, and she said, I finally got you where I want you. I'm rid of you. And I made up my mind at that point, someday I would tell my story. And that didn't happen for another almost 20 years, but I grew in that time and got away from my husband. And I knew that God protected me. And if you love God and you have a relationship with God, it's important for honesty in that relationship. And honesty with God meant he had delivered me out of the situation.
Right.
So in honor of him, I began to tell my story.
Do you remember the first time that you like publicly was able to tell it?
Probably in 1990 when I went to the cops and told them what my husband was doing. I had talked to my sister about the abuse. She's never been able to talk about hers. But I just made up my mind when I wrote the books. I was teaching at the prison at the time. And I thought, if I can work in this prison where inmates I talk to daily and teach are sex offenders, surely I'm brave enough to tell my story. So it's while I was working at the college that I wrote my first book about my abuse.
Wow.
And started talking at church about it to Sunday school classes and just moving forward. And when the book come out, I just knew I was dead. Before my dad died, he put a $750 bounty on me for someone to kill me.
Wow.
I sent him the book, and he had his little granddaughter, my brother's oldest daughter, throw it in the wood stove and burn it.
Wow.
And he was in the nursing home, and he had $750 cash. One of his nurses told me about this, and the deputy sheriff in Madison County at that time told me that my life wasn't worth a plug nickel up there. I went anyway and visited. When I came back to Arkansas, I went to a local restaurant and reserved their banquet room and put on Facebook I was going to be there. A lot of people showed up to talk to me, ask questions, and that was the first time I spoke in my home county about what had happened.
Right.
And it's just snowballed. The braver I get, the more I want to tell my story.
Right. You mentioned your sister too. How is your sister doing?
She's doing as well as she can.
Mm.
And in her, she goes to church, and she has some grandchildren, and she's coping in her way, not my way, but hers. And that's her right. And I give her blessings in doing what she can do for survival. Right.
So, now, we're talking about the books now. You guys have a movie coming.
Yes, Redbird Phoenix I've got it in a script. It's ready. I've had several directors who would like to work on it. It's just getting someone that's brave enough to fund this kind of story.
Right.
And to make a movie out of it. It's a good movie. It's based on the book Redbird Phoenix.
Right.
And it's got some shocking things in the movie. I think it'll be a bestseller for someone if they want to make the movie. All they have to do is contact me and us work and get this thing out to the public.
That's how we got to meet a few years ago. She had talked to a lawyer friend of hers who was a classmate of mine back in high school, and she had asked him about if he knew anybody in the film industry that could help get her book made into a movie, and he suggested me, and so she contacted me, and that's how I got involved and heard her story for the first time. Wow. And my first reaction is, yes, this has to be made. This is the type of story that has to get out there to the public. And so ever since then, I've been working with her, trying to get Redbird Phoenix made into a movie or miniseries or something.
I think with the two books and the counseling book and the years that I put in working with victims, I think we could do a 28 series on using me in what I've done to make a movie plus do a TV series in women, helping women. And this is what I'm hoping to get done and, move it forward. I'd like to see in the movie, in Hat Man, the Assemblies of God in Idaho backed my husband. And my pastor, I was working with him, basically an associate pastor, and he stood with me and the children. And the head of the Assemblies of God in Idaho at that time demanded he go to court for my husband, and he refused. He stood with the kids and I, and later, 6 months later, he resigned from the Assemblies of God when I did. And the church is responsible for a lot of cover-up. I preached many years for the Pentecostal Church of God. They covered up in Baker City, Oregon. They covered up a rape of 34 family members. I was preaching a revival for a church there, and the little girls came to me. I went to the city police. He made a confession, and oops, they were walking carrying his confession and dropped it down a manhole.
Wow.
The county sheriff got involved, the state police. David Palantir was the state trooper. He got involved in that case. The man was arrested, charged, and took it to Supreme Court. And they claimed that the girls and his daughter he had raped at age 44, that they'd waited 1 day too long to file a lawsuit.
Wow.
And he was allowed to go back out into the public. Later, his son, a grandson, Charles Fenwick, was arrested for raping a girl in a Pentecostal Church of God. Ron Crandall was the pastor in Veneta, Oregon. And I stood with that church, and he was convicted. And the Pentecostal Church of God came in and took that $4.5 million away from that congregation, told them in ugly terms, which I won't repeat, to get themselves down the road, kicked it out of the church, sent another congregation in, and those people were stripped of their church. And that pastor was vilified until he had a PTSD breakdown.
Wow.
He's a wonderful man, back into the ministry, doing well. But he stood. Those girls had been telling for a year and a half in Baker City that they'd been raped. And I don't know how many PCFG pastors went through there. They told them every one, and not a one of them reported it.
Wow.
I had a guy out of the home office in Joplin, Reggie Powers, got involved. He sent me documentation of all the case in Joplin, and the Ron Crandall's young girl that was raped, she sued and won, broke the Pentecostal Church of God. They went from a large 5-story building down to one office building.
Wow.
And several other people have stepped forward and sued the church. Helped another case in Texas. And if people step forward and start lawsuits, real fast, courts and lawyers and churches, they tighten their belt and want to stop this.
Right.
And these are just some of the cases that I would like to see put into a series.
Right.
And written and show that women speaking up, and that I work with lawyers. I was helping Michael Robbins with a case. As recently, he referred me to Buddy here locally. He's a wonderful man and a strong advocate for women. I have another lawyer in Conway, Tyler Henderson, who is an absolutely marvelous advocate and knows the law the best of any lawyer I've met here in Arkansas.
Right.
But these people who are willing to stand, back them up.
Right.
Put their name out there.
I just find that amazing that that the churches cover up. Whenever it's so predominant in their congregation, and they're aware of it. It kind of makes you think that they do it because by exposing a member of their congregation, they're probably worried about being legally liable and the lawsuits. But at the same time,
the excuse in Baker City, Oregon, the Pentecostal Church of God used to keep that deacon head deacon in the church. They ordered me not to speak about it or tell about it, or they'd sue me.
Wow.
And they said he's the biggest tithe payer in the church, and the pastor needs his tithes.
Yeah. See, that's, and honestly, it's things like that that turns people off from the church.
It is. Absolutely.
And it's the church's responsibility above anybody to be bringing these things to light. If anybody in our society is going to do it, the church has to be the first.
Well, the scripture teaches it's better for a man to have a millstone tied about his neck and cast into sea than to hurt a little child.
Right.
And that's the church's responsibility.
Yeah. And I know that it's, that it happens in churches, and it's a shame. It's a shame that it happens. More Christians need to stand up, and people in the congregation need to stand up, and then push out leadership or hold the leadership in the churches accountable when something like this is going on. Like you were saying, it's about people standing up and doing what's right.
What is troublesome, Parks, is so many churches are owned by preachers. By men who call themselves preachers. They have no training, no specifications, and the Pentecostal Church of God is made up of such so-called churches. Hundreds of churches hide under that umbrella, and many of the pastors are taking advantage of the ownership and doing what they hold the congregation in their power. And basically, it's cultish.
Right.
And a lot of, here in Arkansas recently, there's a case come against the Southern Baptist Convention where a bunch of boys have been molested. And a law firm in Little Rock has been handling that. And the house of God is the place of accountability.
Right.
And until we have to take the legal politics and power away from such organizations and hold them accountable.
Right. And how do we do that? How do we go in and get these people who are covering it up? How do we get them out of there?
Until the people in the church can be brave enough to say, "You may be our pastor, but you're not controlling us."
Right.
They have to find courage to kick them out themselves, or stop going to that church.
Right.
Stopping money is a very effective way to stop pastors abusing in the church.
And I think other pastors from other churches see that happening because they all know each other. They see that they got to step up too. Stop covering up.
Yes.
And
they have to step forward. They have to step forward.
Right.
We need a list of pastors in every community who have had a background check, who are capable of standing with the victim, so that, like, I can refer, if I have a victim come to me, I can do the counseling, and I can do the spiritual help, but they also need community support. And if I've got a list of trustworthy men and women who are pastoring, I can send that family, that women and their children, to these churches for support.
Right.
In our area, we have food banks. We have an advocacy group here, and that is a start.
Do you think that churches should be required to have a board of directors that keeps that pastor accountable?
Yes, but unfortunately, these pastors who own the church have only on the board who they can manipulate and who will back them. That needs to be a thing of the past.
So, talk about that. They kind of, like, whenever people vote for the board members, you think that the people should be able to nominate the people in the church that they think should be board members, and that process should be done maybe with the pastor stepping aside just so there's not a conflict of interest?
Yes, but often it's not. Well, I'd say 90% of our churches in this country, the board members are supporters of the pastor, and that's unfortunate. Also, the churches need to get sex abuse insurance.
Right.
churches I attend, I insist, or a pastor, that they have insurance, at least in $1 million to $5 million, in case the child gets abused. The church isn't broke,
Right.
and there is insurance available for churches in this type manner.
Do you think that's maybe one of the reasons why churches are afraid to come forward?
It is, and deniability. They don't want anybody to tell. They'll cover it up. And out in Idaho, Oregon, they just move the pastors from church to church. And we've seen that in much, the Catholic Church that's been very publicized. They just move their priest around. Well, that's happened in every church. There's not a church in this country that doesn't have someone in the past or at present who's abusing children.
Wow. Yeah, it's just, it's incredible. I mean, I'm trying to think in my head, a way that we could curb it, in the church and expose it. Because, like I said, church is a place for healing. It's a place for people, who are suffering from that should be able to go to and get the help, even if you're not getting it from outside sources, like the schools or law enforcement. Church is the one place you should be able to get it from. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I firmly believe that. I'm very blessed here locally. I have a wonderful pastor, Jim Benford, and he is highly qualified in our area to do counseling and work with abuse victims. And he is a firm supporter of what I'm doing, and so is my church. And I'm blessed to have their support. You don't find that in every church.
Right.
That's another reason why I think the movie needs to get made, is to bring light onto this subject, but hopefully the attention that the movie can make will show people that these victims can come forward, and that there's people who have same experience that they do, and they could then reach out to Cae and other people, advocates for abuse, and they can supply the materials and resources they need to overcome the situation, just bringing it to light. And we've got so many filmmakers around the country that would be interested in doing it, but it can't be made without the funding. And so as soon as we get the proper investment amount into making this film, we think it can change a lot of lives. There was a recent movie that came out last summer called Where the Crawdads Sing.
Right.
And it touched on the abuse of a young girl from her father. They just touched on it slightly, but it got the point across of what she was going through. And we think this could be that type of movie. It was very successful. Right. And it didn't put, all the disgusting actions on film, but it touched on it enough that the viewer got the point without turning them off. And that's the type of tone in this film, just the right amount, I think, to get people, after they watch it, they want to know more about her story, and that's when they can go to her website and look at her books to find more details about what she had went through, and then they could reach out to her and she can help them in some way.
Right.
That's the reason I said earlier, Parks, I'm willing to speak to any church. I don't ask a large fee to speak. You'll pay my way there and back, my lodging, my food while I'm there. Right. And I will, speak to the issues. I'm also an excellent minister. I've preached a lot of years, 60 years I've been in the ministry, and I love the Lord. I love people. I'm able to deal compassionately and know the scripture and speak to the issues, not to offend, but to liberate.
Right. So I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but do you guys know like a ballpark of the funding that you guys would need?
That would totally be up to the producer of the project, to know how much they want to put into it. We don't want to throw a number out there that,
Right.
right now, but if anybody knows a production company that is not afraid of the subject matter and who has the sources to make a quality film or series out of this,
Right.
they can reach out to me or Cae, and we can see if we can get this movie made, get it out there to the public.
And I'm willing to, I'm quite capable of speaking to the news media, to investors, and I'm very thankful for that. But I'm willing to do whatever I can to help the investors make sure that they have a good return on their believing my story.
Right. And this is definitely a story that needs to be shared. It's a film I think that really needs to be made.
Yeah.
Awareness. So if anybody's out there who's seeing this, who wants to get involved, how do they reach you guys and get involved in this?
Okay, my website is www.caecordell.com, or my email is cae234@msn.com, or you can find me on Facebook just under Cae Cordell, Cae Cordell.
And what we'll do too is I'll put that information in the detail section under the video so that people have links to it. And again, like I said, anybody who wants to get involved in this, that
Yes.
Has a heart and the compassion for this subject, I definitely encourage you because by doing so, you're helping not only get her story out, but reach other people who are going through this and help them to get their stories out as well. So I really want to see this happen. We'll put that information in the detail section. And then, Buddy's an actor, and Buddy knows a lot of other great actors. I'm sure that would be attached to this to help, push the film along as well to get it out there. So
we have a plethora of actors and directors also, and producers who would love to be involved, not only here in Arkansas, but around the, southern states. We've got a lot of people interested. It's just we need investors who will step forward and believe in the movie and know that it can be a valuable asset to them.
There's a lot of actors and producers and directors that are heavyweights in the Christian film community.
Right. I know some of the people
it's just getting the investment dollars to make it.
I'd like to see women from the Me Too movement. I know a lot of our directors, producers. I'd love for them to come forward and get involved.
Right. And a lot of the people too from the Me Too movement, especially in Hollywood, there's a lot of them that's experienced some of this. So you would think that they would want to get involved. They would want to see this this movie be made.
And I don't want to try to wrap this up too quick. Unfortunately, my battery is almost dead on this camera. I just got a few minutes left.
So what we'll do is we're going to put the information in the detail section of the video, and I encourage anybody out there who's listening, please, if you have the financial means to get behind this and invest in it, and you have the heart and compassion, for the story and the subject matter, definitely reach out to either Cae Cordell or to Buddy Campbell and let them know because again, this is something that needs to be exposed and needs to get out there, and we'll do everything in our part to help you guys do that.
I sure appreciate you, Parks, and thank you. If they reach out to you, you just pass them along.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll be pushing the show, and trying to raise awareness as well. And then I'll send them, anybody who's responding to you guys. So well, thank you guys so much, for coming in early on a Saturday, and Cae, for sharing your story. I really enjoyed getting to talk to you and hearing your story and what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that so much, and thank you, Parks.
Cool. So, all right, guys, thank you guys. Again, I love being able to just sit down and meet, new people and hear their incredible journeys. And, this was no exception to that. I just loved, hearing Cae. And, again, if you guys want to get involved, please reach out to Cae and Buddy. Until next time, remember, guys, you're uniquely designed with purpose, and always keep moving forward. Peace.